Hello and welcome to Kettle and Bones, where we make really delicious, really healthy food. And you can too. Today's dish is an extremely simple preparation of a fresh, delicious, nutritious squash. It's often regarded as a popular low-carb alternative to noodles, but I'm consistently impressed with how good this is in its own right. Whichever camp you're in, I'm sure we'll agree, it's healthy and delicious. We're making browned butter spaghetti squash. Let's get cooking. The title of this episode pretty much tells you everything you need to know. Those are the two main components of this dish. We're going to roast a spaghetti squash, this one right here in fact, and we're going to season it using browned butter. It could not be simpler. But you know what we're not going to do? We're not going to pretend this is anything other than what it is. I'm not going to pretend that the inside of this squash is somehow full of semolina pasta noodles and try to convince myself that I'm eating a bowl of actual spaghetti. Don't get me wrong, if you like red sauce or pesto or cream sauce or any other tasty pasta sauce on a spaghetti squash, I certainly do, then buon appetito. But this is spaghetti in name only. It is, all on its own, a delicious squash, the natural flavors of which we are going to amplify and enhance today with our rich browned butter sauce. I am cutting the very ends off of our spaghetti squash, not without exerting some effort. Spaghetti squash is pretty difficult to cut when it's raw. The skin is fairly thick and very tough, and the interior is quite firm. Once the ends are off, I'm going to stand it up on one end and slice down the long way. I feel like this gives me the most stable and the best leveraged position for cutting. Some people will tell you to microwave the squash first to soften it up and make it easier to cut, usually 4 or 5 minutes on high. You can do this if you like, but me, I'd rather not cook it for any additional time if I don't have to. So my blade is sharp, my heart is pure, and if I strike true, the spaghetti squash will soon lie defeated before me. In these two nice halves. I'm going to grab a spoon and scrape out the interior pulp and seeds. If you've ever carved a pumpkin at Halloween, this will be very familiar. Next, we're going to season these very simply before they go in the oven for roasting. I'm putting these onto my foil-lined baking tray, and let's drizzle on a little olive oil, sprinkle on a few pinches of salt, and several generous turns of freshly ground black pepper. I'm going to flip these so they face down on the tray, and these are going into a preheated oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit, that's about 190 degrees Celsius, for 40 minutes, 40. That is, of course, based on my specific squash. This is about a 2.5 to 3 pounder. If you have a smaller one, obviously it may take a little less time, and as with all things we bake, some of that simply depends on your oven. You always want to err on the side of caution with spaghetti squash, though. Undercooked, it's a little too firm and almost crunchy, but it can be put back in to roast a little longer. Overcooked, it's mush, and there's nothing that can be done to fix that. While the two halves of our squash are cooking together happily, we're going to brown some butter. If you're feeling anxious because you've heard horror stories about how hard it is to get brown butter just right, don't sweat it. There are several things we can do to set ourselves up for success. First, we're using a light-colored pan. A big part of getting this right is watching for the color change from yellow to brown. So you don't want to use a dark-bottomed pan. No non-stick or cast iron this time, no copper. Just a nice, bright stainless steel is best. I'm adding a stick of butter to the pan while it is still cold. My burner is on medium heat, 320 Fahrenheit, 160 Celsius. I'm going to let that melt gradually, swirling frequently to make sure nothing has a chance to burn. Gotta keep this moving. When it comes to the type of butter to use, there are some different schools of thought. Some chefs will tell you unsalted butter is the best way to go if you intend to brown it. Generally, I tend to agree. For one, using unsalted butter means that you are in control of how salty your end result is. That's just a good policy for all kinds of sauces. If you use salted butter, you are automatically adding however much salt the butter manufacturer decided to put in. But the main reason to use unsalted butter for this application is that as butter melts and cooks, it's going to foam up, and that's going to obscure our view a little bit and make it harder to see the color change when it happens. Unsalted butter foams up much less than salted butter, so it's just easier to get right because you can better see what's going on in your pan. So unsalted butter is the preferred butter for browning. All good? Good. There's just one problem. This is salted butter. I'm out of unsalted butter. I used my last little bit of it to make the balsamic cream sauce for our vegetables a couple episodes ago, so I only have salted butter. So what does that mean? Will this even work? Are we doomed? Relax, relax, just breathe. No, we are totally fine. You need to be aware that you're going to have a sort of screen of foam to deal with toward the end of the browning process, and you need to make sure it doesn't cause you to burn your butter. I'll show you using my salted butter. The most important thing you need to remember here is keep it moving. With a combination of swirling and stirring with a heat-proof spatula, we're going to keep this in constant motion. I'm already picking up on a noticeable change in the aroma of the butter. It's darker, sweeter, almost a little nuttier. It's really nice. It's getting foamier now, so I really have to make sure I'm keeping this moving, scraping along the bottom of the pan to ensure that no little bits end up staying in one place for too long. It's really foaming up now. It's getting harder to see the actual liquid. We knew this was coming though, so don't panic. Don't be afraid to lift the pan off the heat every now and then too if you're concerned that you can't see things as well as you'd like. That will make the foaming action subside for a second. It's really foamy now. I'm having a difficult time seeing through it, actually. I'm keeping it moving. I'm sweeping the foam aside. I'm looking for liquid at the bottom. And, oh, did you see that? Through the foam. Brown. It's brown. Let's get it off of there. You see why this is tricky? The browning kind of happens all at once. If you miss that moment and leave it on the heat, your butter will scorch. I'm going to grab a heat-proof container, I'm just going to use a mug, and in goes our browned butter. We have to get it out of the pan right away because it's actually sensitive enough right now that even leaving it in the hot pan would be enough to overcook and burn it. Look at that. Get all the little brown bits out of the pan. That's where the flavor comes from. In fact, the little brown bits are actually the milk solids that have separated from the rest of the butter and changed colors. That's where the brown comes from. It's toasted milk solids. Looks like the richest, thickest cup of tea you've ever seen. I'm setting that aside and I'm going to keep it covered so it stays warm. Well done, everybody. We did it. Woo! You should be proud. I know I am. We are just coming up on 40 minutes since our squash went into the oven. Let's check in on it. Oh yeah, those look ready. Out they come. We can tell by the slight wrinkling on the rind that the inside has softened and it should be nicely fork tender while still being firm and toothsome. I'm going to transfer these carefully to spaghetti squash-shaped serving dishes. These are still really hot. Be careful. And using 2 forks, I'm just going to rough up the inside of each of these, pulling some of the cooked squash flesh away from the rind. Now do you see why they call these spaghetti squash? They're slightly noodly looking inside, and then that's about it. The first thing we're going to do to season this is spoon in some of our delicious aromatic browned butter, making sure to scoop up plenty of toasted brown milk solids from the bottom of the cup as well. The rich nuttiness of this butter is perfect with the fresh, crisp, mild sweetness of the squash itself. Next, I'm going to add some salty, dry, hard cheese. I'm using Parmigiano Reggiano on mine, but something like Pecorino Romano would be really good, or even Mizithra if you can find it. That's a salty Greek sheep's milk cheese. And that's basically it for the flavors in this dish. I promise you, nobody's going to complain if you sprinkle on a little more of that browned butter. It's kind of one of those basic principles of plating a dish as well. You usually want your diners to be able to see what is in the dish on site, so a little brown butter on top is perfect. And as we often do, let's add both some green color and some herby freshness with a little parsley. This spaghetti squash makes an excellent side item. If you're serving it next to something pretty substantial, a half a squash will probably feed 2 people. You could cut it right down the middle here and serve it in 2 smaller bowls. But this makes a great main meal as well. That's how I'm having this one today. I'm going to add whatever protein I happen to have handy. In this case, it's an oven-roasted chicken thigh with flavors of garlic, pepper, lemon zest, herbs. The versatile flavors in this spaghetti squash will go well with so many things. And there we have it. A startlingly simple side item, or main dish, bursting with flavor that is rich, full-bodied, and distinct, while somehow at the same time being unexpectedly, refreshingly uncomplicated. Stay with Kettle and Bones for many, many more simple, easy, quick, delicious, nutritious, fantastic, bombastic, gregarious, hilarious, healthy, stealthy, low-carb meals. But for now, just enjoy your browned butter spaghetti squash.